get started. And first of all, just a very short introduction to what is BIM and why BricsCAD BIM. So BIM stands for, as many of you know, Building Information Modeling or Building Information Model. So it's a virtual digital representation of your building. And because it's virtual, it gives us this single source of truth for the building. And we're creating the building electronically, virtually, out of construction elements that are available in the real world. So that gives us a lot of information. And that better information helps with reducing potential design errors. That will lead to hopefully savings of time and money throughout the building life cycle. And that's one of the reasons building owners really like BIM, is because of the long-term value that they can see over the life of that building. Now, why BricsCAD BIM? Well, we're a little bit different than other BIM programs, and that's mostly because we are based on DWG. So if you use other CAD programs, if you're using BricsCAD CAD, Pro or Lite, you already know a lot of BricsCAD BIM because the commands are the same. The 2D commands are the same. You're working the same way. Your workflow is similar. You can use XREFs to break up your BIM building into smaller pieces that are easier to manage. And that keeps your model a little more lightweight. Also, it's one platform. We've seen that we're working with Light and Pro and Mechanical and BIM all within the BricsCAD platform, which is based on DWG. So it's fairly easy to learn, but it also gives you the integration between all of those different products on one platform, specifically with BIM and mechanical design. So you think of all the building components that have to be manufactured to be put into a building. And we can do that with BricsCAD BIM and mechanical. We can kind of create assemblies in the BIM model or design detailed manufactured building components right in BricsCAD BIM. And then of course, this gives us all the other tools, the machine learning, the AI tools. We've seen some of those in some of the other trainings, Blockify, Copy Guided, and what we'll see now in BIM with BIMify, with Propagate, and some other things. So that's just a very quick introduction. And now let's jump in and look at the interface, viewing, and navigation as well. So what I've started with here is the launcher. When you first launch BricsCAD, you'll have options for different different workflows. Now, because I'm running, and probably most of you are running BIM or Ultimate, you'll have multiple here. We are working with BIM today, so we'll go ahead and launch the BIM. Now, when this comes up, we have our Getting Started page. Should be very familiar. Our Home tab here, this is where you can create new drawings by selecting your appropriate template. There are many templates that come with the product. You can create your own and have them displayed up here as well. Today, we're using the BIM template here. So we're just going to hit New Drawing, and that creates that millimeter template. Back here on the start, we have Learn. So you've got tutorials, sample files are here. And then our applications. This brings us to our third-party applications, over 400 third-party applications that you can look for, look at, try, buy right from here. Also, back at the home page, you have your list of recent files and their paths. So it's very easy to start a file that you've recently used. And let's go ahead into that new drawing. Up at the very upper left is the little BricsCAD icon. That's your file menu. So lots of information here: start new drawings, recent files, close drawings, saves, imports, page setups, all that good things are right there in that file menu. Now, out of the box, you can see that this has the light interface. If you'd prefer the dark interface, just right-click in an empty space on the ribbon and come here to dark interface and just click it. So it's a toggle on or off, whichever you prefer. When we first started the software, We had the workspace choice. Once you're in a drawing, you can always change your workspace a couple of different ways. Again, right-clicking in an empty space on the ribbon gives you the right-click menu for your workspaces, and you can choose from the different workspaces. Now, workspaces really are just switching out the tools available to you quickly. So your panels, your toolbars, based on that type of workflow. You can also change your workspace down here at the status bar. So I'm going to change that back to BIM. I've also showing this toolbar, which is called the Access 3D toolbar. Again, your toolbars are accessible by right-clicking in the blank space on the ribbon, coming to toolbars, and do note that there are 2 pages of toolbars available to you. I'm using the Access 3D, and that gives us, particularly what we're going to see shortly, are some of these tools for viewing, hiding, showing things, and also for our selection modes. And we're going to talk about all of that in just a few minutes. Of course, our ribbon has different tabs to organize tools based on function. And our model tab down here, by default, we're working in model space. Our layout tabs are right next to that. These also known as paper space. Just a reminder, we do have a layout manager that allows you to create and manage and even print your paper space layouts very quickly and conveniently. Dockable panels by default are along the right-hand side here. Now your panels might be in a different order. It's very easy to just move these around. Again, right-click will bring up the menu that you can turn on and off your different panels. So if we're going through the sessions today, you can see if you don't have a panel, just come over here and go ahead and right-click to turn those on and off. Now with the BIM workspace, by default, you do have 2 panels on the left-hand side. We have the BIM project browser and the structure panel. So be aware of that. And of course, you are welcome to customize this to however you prefer to work. Command line down at the bottom as well. It's also fully adjustable to work however you like. You can change the size, you can make it float. So a lot of customization there as well. All right, now, before we dive in, there are a few settings that I do want to talk about. And those will be down here at the status bar. So this is where we'll be looking, and also typing some commands in. First of all, we do want to be sure that our eSnaps are turned on and S tracking, and these are just toggles, so you can click on them. Right click will bring you into the settings, so you can turn your snaps on, for example, which snaps you want on or off. We also do want to be sure that dynamic UCS is on, dynamic input, the quad cursor, the rollover tips, and the Hotkey Assistant. So if you're not seeing those, you should just turn those on. Now, some other things that we need to look at are, first one is called DM Extrude. I'm just going to type that in. And as I start typing, notice that we get a little box here that's presenting me with options based on what I've started to type. So we want DM Extrude Mode, and we want that setting to be at 3. This setting controls how entities are extruded. 3 is the default for BIM, and that means a separate solid will be created or subtracted from the intersecting solids. We also want quad display set to 5. This controls how the quad menu displays. Having a value of 5 means that the quad will display when you hover your cursor over an entity, and also when you right-click your mouse, that will bring up the quad cursor. Anti-alias screen, set that to 2. This setting controls the amount of anti-aliasing or edge smoothing that is applied during on-screen rendering. Now, also what we want to look at are our selection modes, and I hinted at those earlier up here in my Access 3D toolbar. We have the ability to select how we're going to select based on edge, based on face, based on boundaries. And these are little toggles up here that go on and off. And if there's a black background, you can see it's off. So turning it on, you'll have a little white or gray background. And what we want is enable boundary detection and prioritize selection of faces to be on. Now that another way to set those is setting called selection modes. And again, we can just type in selection modes at the command line, and you can see you can enter a value. We want that value to be 6. Well, how do these values work? If we take a quick look at settings from our settings menu and type in selection modes, now you may have to expand that. We can see select edges, select faces, select detected boundaries. That's referring to these 3 icons here. To the left, we have numbers. Those are the default values. So the combination of adding those values together gives us that number that we typed in at the command line. So faces and boundaries being on, 2 and 4 gives me a value of 6. That's how those work. All right, so that's the settings that we want to have set. And now let's talk a little bit about viewing. And to do that, I'll open up a drawing. You do have the drawings that were available for you to download from 24/7. This is from the starter files, interface, viewing and navigation, building M1. So we'll go ahead and open that. And this is just a somewhat simple BIM model. Now, when we're working in models, whether it's in Pro or even in BIM, a lot of times we want to hide things or isolate things in order to do some work. It sometimes makes that work easier. So we have several tools to do that. So first of all, if we want to hide some things, let's say we want to hide these windows, we can just simply select the windows and notice that as soon as I did that, my quad cursor comes up. And we'll talk in more detail about the quad a little bit later. But right now we can see that we have isolate entities and we have hide entities. Let's go ahead and click hide. And now you can see that those windows are temporarily hidden. They're not gone. They're just temporarily hidden. Now on the other side of the building, let's select these windows. And instead of hiding them, let's go ahead and isolate them. But notice that my first option on the quad is hide and then isolate. When we first started, it was isolate and then hide. That's because the first option here on the quad is going to be that first or the last icon or tool that was used based on this entity type. So just be careful on that, but we are going to isolate. So now we've isolated just those windows. So it's very easy to do. Now, once we've done our work, if we want to show everything again, a couple of ways to do that. First being with my quad, right click, we can go to the General tab and show entities. Now notice that those hide, show, and isolate are also up here in your Access 3D toolbar. Sometimes it's just as quick to pop up there and make that selection there. Another way to select items is through the structure browser. So again, by default, the structure browser is located on the left side of your screen. It should be showing the BIM CST file. If not, you can click on the hamburger menu and you'll see all the available CST files. We just want that to be BIM. And we also want our options to how things are shown in the tree. We want select entities when selected in the tree, on entity selection, and deselect entities on hide. And as we expand the building elements here within the structure browser, we can see roofs, slabs, stairs, walls. If we look at walls, first of all, there's a number. That means that there are 54 walls here. So by selecting this item right here in the structure browser with one click, I can select all 54 walls in this building. And with right clicking, again, I have show, hide, and isolate. So I can hide those walls. Again, one click. It's much quicker than having to click, manually go in and click each of those walls individually. and then we can come back and put everything back to be visible. All right, let's talk a little bit about navigating in 3D. And this might be a review if you've been in the other sessions. Probably you have a mouse that has a wheel on it. Spinning the wheel will scroll. Holding down that wheel allows you to pan. And then to orbit, if you hold down your shift key on your keyboard and that wheel button, that allows you to orbit. Now, I also have a 3D connection mouse. This is not required, but it does make panning and zooming and orbiting very smooth. So if you do a lot of modeling, that is something that you might want to consider purchasing. The ribbon here under the View tab, of course, has many more panning and zooming and orbiting tools as well. Also, I want to point out this, which is called the Look From navigation tool. So this is in the upper right, and there's a chair in the middle of it. And then you can see your different view angles. So by clicking these, it will rotate the model to be, in this case, this top front view, back, top back right, top front view, things like that. So very easy to quickly navigate. Now, if you want to look at your model from underneath, you can still use the Look From tool, but just hold your control key down and then click one of those options, and it will rotate below the model. To go to the top of the model, just without control, just click in the center, and that will bring you to that top view. Now, in this model, we see that we already have some section and elevation cut planes that have already been created. We can also very quickly highlight all of them from the structure browser to really get an image of where we've got sections and elevations being cut and plans as well. These were done automatically with the Classify or the BIMify tool, but we can also define them manually. Now, again, if you were in the pro training, when we did modeling, we were able to cut sections, but they were not quite as easy as they are with the BIM section tool. And to do that, we can simply right click to bring up the quad, and under model, we have the define section tool. Now this will change my cursor to a direction and a plane. And as I move my cursor over a plane, you'll see that my cursor orients itself, and I just click, and now I can move my cursor and determine where I want that section cut to be. I can simply click with my mouse, left click, or I can type in a value, which you see in that blue box. So it's very easy to do that. Sometimes it helps if you turn your snaps off for that particular feature, so you're not snapping to something. We can also, let me show you, if we do that section from the top, notice how my cursor now is looking down into the building, and that will give me those plan sections. And you can see if we just rotate our view, that's the beginning of my floor plan. And if we need an elevation, I find the easiest way to do that is to hover over the face of the building that I want that elevation, and then click on the shift key. That locks my, my cursor in that direction. And now we can adjust where that elevation is placed to look at the front of the building there. And that's also explained in the handout here with your view directions. You've got your section plane plus your view direction. And then depending upon the way that you cut into that section, gives you your plan, your vertical section, and your elevations. The properties panel, again, should be here on the right-hand side. If it's not, you can right-click and go to panels and turn on properties. Properties, even with nothing selected, you can see here it says no selection. It does show us a lot of information. Especially important with modeling would be our perspective, if we want our perspective to be on or off. Now, when you turn your perspective off, the background does go black, so that's a little bit of a visual clue that you're no longer in that perspective mode. Also, we have different visual styles for the model. Default for BIM is BIM, of course, but we also have several others: modeling, shaded, even X-ray, so you can kind of see within the building. Now, these can also be changed from that look from tool. So you've got your visual styles as well as turning your perspective on or off. So as in most CAD programs, there are multiple ways to do something. So find what's convenient for you and use that. All right, next we'll talk a little bit about selecting entities, how we select them, and how to use the quad cursor in a little bit more detail. So first of all, let's talk about the quad. So what is the quad? Well, it's a floating toolbar, basically. It's a AI-based tool palette in a heads-up display right at your cursor. And it will change based on how you use the software and what you are particularly doing at the moment. So it will change. Now, if we have nothing selected, so I'm not hovering, nothing selected, I'm just out here in space, and I right click, it brings up the quad in what we call the no selection state. That means nothing's been selected. So maybe think of this as your default state. And as I move my cursor, you see this expands, and these tabs expand with different commands under them based on model, draw, BIM, insert in general for right now. So let me change a drawing into my blank drawing here, and I'm just going to draw a very simple 3D box. So as I hover now over here, the quad shows up with just one tool, and it says solid face because I'm hovering over a face. And this one tool, this first spot, is the last tool that was used on that type of entity. So in this case, this was push-pull. So now I can just push-pull on that tool very easily, or the box very easily. So that's fine for selecting a face, but what if we want to select the entire solid, or we want to select just an edge? Well, we have those different selection modes that we've talked about earlier with edge, face, and boundary. And we have different combinations that we saw. So with the prioritized selection of faces and boundaries turned on, we can see by default, I'm selecting or hovering over a face. Now, as I left click and make that selection of the face, we can also see in the properties panel, it tells me that that face has been selected. If I hover and then hold the control key down on my keyboard, the entire 3D solid is highlighted. And if I left click, now we can see I've selected the entire solid. Okay, but what if I want to work with just an edge? Well, as I hover on the edge, and it's hard to see because it's only prioritizing selection of faces yet, but again, if I hold down the control key, now it will isolate that edge that I can click. And now again, in the properties panel, we see that we've got that edge. Now that's really the same thing as if I turn on that prioritized selection of edges. Now I can just come in and select that edge, but you probably don't always want to have your prioritized selection of edges. So you can override that by holding down the control key. And you'll see throughout the training, as you may have already seen, using some of the different keys, the control key, the shift key, the tab key, are going to give you additional options to working with BricsCAD BIM. So, okay, we've seen how to select a face or an edge or an entire solid, but what if we want to be able to select multiple entities? How can we do that? Well, we do that with different selection windows. And first of all, let me just draw another box here. So we have two. We have two different window selection types. One is blue and one is green. So your blue selection window is created when you draw that selection window starting from the left going to the right. Doesn't matter if it's up or down, but it's your direction of start, left to right. Now, the opposite, right to left, will give me that green selection window. Now, the green selection window is your crossing window, and your blue is basically your boundary. So if I select or create a blue crossing window around this first box entirely, that solid is created. If I create that blue bounding box only partially around that box, nothing is selected, because with the blue box, everything must be contained within that selection window to be selected. With the green box or the selection window, whatever crosses into that green selection window will be selected. So here, even though I'm not including the entire solid in my selection, that entire solid is selected. Now it gets a little more complicated because we're going to do this again, but notice as I start my selection window down here, something appears. This is called the Hotkey Assistant. And as I hover my cursor, it gives me tooltips. So I can select an entity, a face, or an edge. But this is just the tooltips. I actually will use the control key on the keyboard to toggle through these selections. So once I start my selection window, I can use the control key once, and now we see those orange faces are highlighted. And again, looking at the properties panel, we see that 6 solid faces have been selected. If I do that again and hit control twice, that will bring me to the edges. So now we have 12 edges, and it is a little hard to differentiate pictorially here between edges and faces. And that's why you do want to look at your properties panel. Now with the green crossing window, the same thing applies. Without hitting the tab key, the default here is just to select the entity, which is that solid, or hit control once. We've got the faces, 4 faces, and hit it twice. That gives me, in this case, 5 edges that I've selected. So a little bit of several different options to make those selections for. So that is the introduction and a little bit about using the quad.